The military is a noble and respected profession due to its significant contributions to society. However, even in the wildest imagination, no one could imagine a soldier willing to throw away all dignity, stain his honor and image to become a perverted murderer, shocking Canada's history. The main character in this story is a 47-year-old man named Russell Williams, known by his rank of colonel, a prominent pilot in the Canadian Armed Forces. He was trusted to carry out important missions and interacted with many key political figures, including flying the plane carrying Queen Elizabeth and the President of Canada. But he overturned all that achievement with unspeakable crimes. Russell Williams was born in Bromsgrove, England, and later immigrated to Canada with his family. He witnessed his parents' divorce at the age of 6. His mother later remarried a close neighbor and quickly moved away. Despite growing up without his father's love, Russell showed qualities of success and excelled academically, entering a prestigious university in Toronto. In 1987, at the age of 27, Russell joined the Canadian military with big ambitions. Recognizing Russell's potential, he was sent to the Canadian Air Force's Flight Training School, where he served as an instructor from 1990 to 1991. Russell Williams' career progressed, eventually becoming the commander of Trenton Air Base in 2009. Russell was considered a model soldier throughout his 23-year career. He even once escorted Queen Elizabeth II, the Prime Minister of Canada, and many other high-ranking officials. With an admirable career, Russell was fortunate to be married to Elizabeth, who worked in healthcare as a director for the Canadian Heart and Stroke Foundation. They were the couple that everyone envied. They lived a seemingly happy life, purchasing a luxurious house in Ottawa in 2004. And later, a cottage in the suburbs to enjoy peaceful weekends. Russell often went to the cottage alone, and during these trips, a sick habit developed that eventually led to unforgivable crimes. In May 2007, Russell's criminal acts began to take shape. He secretly monitored young girls living around his residence, memorizing their daily habits, such as when they went to work or returned home. Taking advantage of moments when houses were empty, he stealthily broke in to indulge his perverse pleasures. But what were those perverse pleasures? As mentioned, Russell was a very powerful man, appearing as a dignified, trustworthy individual, and especially had a lot to lose. To avoid jeopardizing his dream life, he had to be extremely cautious in all his actions, leaving no trace and, most importantly, not being discovered. Thus, he broke into the houses of girls with the aim of stealing women's underwear and adult toys. Russell's first victim was a girl only 12 years old. He sneaked in when no one was there, took a pair of pink panties, and began to masturbate with it. Furthermore, Russell tried on the panties and took pictures and videos for 3 hours. Finally, he left, of course, carefully erasing all traces of his break-in so as not to be discovered. After the successful first heist, Russell continued his depraved acts many more times, using the same method. He broke into many different houses, some of which he visited multiple times. Russell acted openly in violation of the law, and gradually, the demon within him grew larger, devouring the morality of this once highly admired and respected man. In November 2009, Russell drove from his home to a residential area 30 minutes away. He sat in his car, quietly watching a house. When the owner, a woman named Anne, left, he began to act. With his experience, Russell easily broke the lock to open the door and stepped inside. He went straight to Anne's bedroom on the second floor, searched everywhere, and finally found what he needed: Anne's underwear and toys. Not only that, Russell also accessed the victim's computer to steal adult videos stored there. After completing his task, Russell felt excited and left the place, leaving an anonymous letter to threaten his opponent, something that had never happened before. In the letter, he wrote on the computer, "If you like, report to the police. I will expose all these shameful items to everyone. Then, will you still have the face to live?" These words show that Russell's behavior was becoming more bold. He was no longer just committing burglary and theft, but also threatening, endangering others physically, mentally, and even putting their lives at risk. Anne returned home late in the evening after a fun time with friends and felt a chill when she saw the broken door. She decided to check around to find the culprit, but found no one. When she reached the bedroom, she was stunned to see everything ransacked and even more terrified when she received a threat from a mysterious intruder. Too scared to report to the police, Anne felt unsafe and went to stay with a friend for the night. However, she did not know that this escape was part of Russell's elaborate plan. Her absence made the house an easier target. Russell was aware of this and returned to continue his vile actions. He stripped off his clothes, wore Anne's underwear, and posed freely in front of the mirror, taking photos and videos without worrying about Anne suddenly returning. A few days later, when Anne returned home, it was too late. Russell had achieved what he wanted, while Anne couldn't report him to anyone. Shortly after Anne's case, a woman named Jane, 21 years old, also a single mother living with her son in the same neighborhood where Russell resided, became the next victim he targeted. This time, Russell's crime was even more serious. He didn't wait until everyone left the house, but boldly broke in, even when people were present. He secretly entered the house without making any noise, as the two lived very close to each other. To conceal his identity, Russell wore a mask. He silently waited in the bedroom. At that moment, Jane had just put her son to sleep and returned to her room, when she was suddenly overpowered by Russell. He blindfolded and gagged her, threatening that if she didn't remain silent, he would kill her. Though terrified, Jane could only comply with his demands, pleading with Russell not to harm her child. However, Russell was not there for the child, but to carry out his plan to assault Jane. He tied Jane to a chair to easily carry out his vile acts. Even more disgusting, he forced her to pose in seductive positions and took pictures for 3 hours. This left the victim traumatized and overwhelmed with fear. The next morning, after committing such horrific acts, Russell returned to his image as a highly respected military colonel, wearing an Air Force uniform and prestigious medals, attending a charity event organized by the intelligence agency. In reality, Russell was living a double life. By day, he was a well-mannered and beloved man. But by night, he became a predatory wolf, committing depraved acts that no one could imagine. Though he appeared clean on the outside, Russell's soul had long been rotten. 13 days after Jane's case, a woman named Lori reported to the police that she had been attacked by a mysterious man in her own home. Lori recounted that the man knocked her unconscious, tied her to the sofa, stripped her clothes, and began his vile actions. The police connected the details and realized that Lori's case was similar to recent assault reports, all committed by the same perpetrator. However, information about the suspect remained unclear. Lori could only provide the police with the attacker's voice, and she suspected it was Larry John, a neighbor who lived nearby. Immediately, Larry was heavily criticized by everyone in the neighborhood, to the point where he didn't dare to show his face outside. Everyone saw him as a pervert and looked at him with anger. Larry became a victim of isolation and false accusations, while the real culprit remained free and unpunished. Russell even earned the trust of the townspeople as he held the rank of colonel, making everyone feel reassured without a hint of suspicion. Russell was too cunning, deceiving everyone with his appearance, while continuing to commit these vile acts, even at his military workplace. In the Air Force unit, there was only one female officer named Mary, 38 years old, who was a close subordinate of Russell. They had worked together on many flights transporting leaders. Mary was a flight attendant, and as her direct superior, Russell knew everything about her, from her phone number and home address to her work schedule. No detail escaped his notice, especially since he had already targeted Mary as his prey. He broke into her home whenever Mary was away to commit his terrible acts. On a day in November 2009, Mary's life changed forever when she discovered that her underwear had mysteriously disappeared without any reason. Despite carefully checking, she couldn't find them anywhere. This strange occurrence made Mary feel uneasy, but not serious enough to report to the police. She only thought they might have blown away when drying outside. By the end of November, according to her work schedule, Mary had a trip abroad, and Russell took advantage of this opportunity to continue his actions, believing he wouldn't be caught. However, things didn't go as planned when Mary unexpectedly took a leave without notice. But even more brazenly, Russell didn't leave. He went into her basement with a knife. The presence of an uninvited guest made Mary's cat feel uncomfortable, meowing constantly to warn its owner. Curious, Mary went down to the basement, unaware that Russell was waiting with a weapon. When Mary turned on the light, she was unprepared and was immediately knocked unconscious by Russell. He tied her up and committed vile acts despite Mary's painful pleas. Heartlessly, he watched as his victims slowly died from blood loss without a shred of pity. After Mary's death, Russell quickly cleaned up the crime scene and quietly left as mysteriously as he had arrived. A few hours later, Mary's boyfriend arrived at her home after being unable to contact her. He was horrified to find that Mary had been brutally murdered and was lying cold in the basement. He immediately called the police, and an investigation was launched, but all clues had been wiped clean. The killer had planned everything too carefully, leaving no mistakes behind. After the murder, Russell pretended as if nothing had happened, even attending Mary's funeral, crying and offering condolences to her family. Those fake tears deceived everyone, allowing him to hide his crimes for a long time. All investigators tried to uncover who had killed Mary. Even an amateur would know that this wasn't the right time to act, let alone a seasoned perpetrator like Russell. 2 months later, the case began to fade from people's attention. Russell was no longer under strict police surveillance, which gave him the chance to resume his activities. His next target was Jessica Lloyd, 27 years old, who managed administrative tasks for school buses and lived near the town of Tritt, where Russell operated. He couldn't forget the thrill of overpowering his victims or indulging in his depraved actions with their underwear. Russell was driven to satisfy this sick pleasure, and only young women living alone were suitable. But this time, his tactics changed. Instead of attacking inside the home, he kidnapped Jessica and took her to another location. The next morning, on January 29, 2010, Jessica's company tried to contact her after noticing her unusual absence, but all attempts failed. They asked her brother for help. When he arrived at Jessica's home, they found no trace of her, only scattered belongings, as if the house had been broken into. Notably, her glasses and wallet were found on the pathway leading inside, escalating the situation. During the investigation, the police discovered two crucial details. The first was the footprint of a man imprinted on the snow in the backyard, while the cold weather made this trace very clear. Next to it was Jessica's shoe print. The second detail was strange tire tracks, not from a typical vehicle. From there, the police concluded that Jessica had been stalked and kidnapped by a stranger. Immediately, a large-scale search was launched in the town with every force mobilized, as time was of the essence. The longer the delay, the more dangerous Jessica's life would be. Even Russell joined the public, playing the hero, ensuring everyone would be protected. He publicly declared that his unit would provide necessary support while expressing regret at the terrible situation. Despite tireless efforts, Jessica was never found. While the search was underway, local police focused on evidence collected at Jessica's house. Thanks to a unique tire track, they decided to block all town exits, leaving only one route open on Highway 37. Every vehicle passing through the checkpoint was thoroughly inspected. On February 4, 2010, the police easily found the Nissan Pathfinder SUV. By just a glance, they recognized the unique tire matching the tracks left at Jessica's house. They looked at each other in astonishment, realizing they had sprung the trap but could not show their emotions. The biggest question now was, who was driving that vehicle? When the car window rolled down, the police were stunned to find Colonel Russell Williams inside, the man they had always respected. It seemed Russell didn't understand what was happening and requested the police to speed up the check so he could go home, as his son was seriously ill. Despite their suspicions, the police had to let Russell pass. However, later, they discovered that Russell had no son, and everything he said was a lie. By February 10, 2010, Russell was finally summoned for investigation. James Smith, a veteran criminal investigator from Ontario, was tasked with interrogating him. James' involvement highlighted the severity of the case, since Russell was a military colonel, requiring someone more experienced than local police. Sitting across from James in the interrogation room, Russell showed no fear. Instead, he seemed confident, chewing gum the entire time. However, when confronted about the tire tracks matching those at Jessica's house, he immediately went silent and quickly confessed. Russell spent the next 10 hours recounting the process of his crimes and the reasons behind his transformation into a killer. He explained that on the night of January 28, 2010, he had secretly watched Jessica while she was running on a treadmill in her basement. At 1 a.m., he broke into her house while she slept, blindfolded and gagged her, and assaulted her for 3 hours. Afterward, Russell dragged Jessica into his car and took her to his home in Tritt, where she was still alive and begging for release. Russell agreed, but only if she allowed him to continue abusing her for 21 hours. After fulfilling his desires, Russell heartlessly killed Jessica without remorse. He hid her body in his garage and later buried it in a forest near town. Russell explained that he confessed to feel less haunted by his actions and, more importantly, to ease the burden on his beloved wife. After his confession, he left a note for his wife expressing his remorse and asking for forgiveness, along with a request for her to continue taking care of their pet cat. The case files were completed within less than 24 hours, and Russell was arrested by the police. They searched his home in Tritt in Ottawa, discovering many notes, photos, and other evidence proving Russell's involvement in prior attacks. He had burned his lingerie collection twice in fields near Ottawa, but what remained was enough to convict him, including photos of the rooms of 2 11-year-old twin girls and 87 stolen lingerie pieces from a teenage girl living alone. On his computer, police found numerous images and videos of him assaulting his victims. They also found a document containing detailed plans of his crimes, including dates, times, victims, and locations, resembling a criminal diary. In April 2010, Major John Williams took over the case of this Air Force colonel. Many in the military court involved in the case had heard rumors that their homes were also among those Russell confessed to breaking into. In the same month, Russell attempted suicide in prison by stuffing cardboard down his throat but failed. He was then placed under special surveillance. On July 23, 2010, Russell was brought to trial at the Bell Superior Court in Ontario, Canada. On October 18, 2010, in the Belve courtroom, Colonel Russell Williams was found guilty of 2 murders, 2 sexual assaults, and 82 breaches. The prosecution presented evidence, including numerous photographs Williams took of his victims being tortured and images of himself in the victims' lingerie, in a state of high arousal. Some pictures featured cartoon characters, while others were close-ups of him wearing silk lingerie in an aroused state. The prosecution only described the contents of the tape he recorded, as it was too perverse and violent to be shown. On October 21, 2010, Russell was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder, plus an additional 125 years for other charges. Even after sentencing, Russell expressed no remorse or apology to the victims. The court ordered the destruction of his SUV and all the records he had kept, as well as hundreds of stolen lingerie items. The court also fined Williams $8,800 Canadian dollars, or $100 per crime, which would be paid into a fund for the victims. When the media reported on Williams' case, many Canadian citizens called for the death penalty, a punishment that had been abolished in the country since 1976. Currently, Williams is imprisoned in the highest security prison in Kingston, Ontario. However, he may still be eligible for parole in 2035, when he will be 72 years old, despite the horrifying crimes he committed. Some analysts argue that Russell cannot be classified as a serial killer because, according to US FBI and Canadian federal police standards, serial murder is defined as at least 3 killings occurring over a specific period. If Russell had not been caught after Jessica's case and remained free, he would likely have continued committing crimes and causing further terror. Analysts called him a new king of master, because there was no precedent for someone achieving such an enviable social status and honor, only to devolve into a murderer within 2 years. The criminal's wife, Elizabeth, was not present at the trial, but her husband's crimes made her life increasingly difficult. She not only had to face the fact that her husband of 20 years was a lingerie thief, a murderer of 2 people, and an assailant of 2 others, but also a lawsuit. One of the surviving victims of Williams' attack sued the former colonel and his wife, demanding $2.45 million Canadian dollars in compensation. The victim not only sought reparation from Williams for the crimes and emotional damage he caused, but also accused them of illegally transferring assets to avoid future judgments. Shortly after Russell's arrest, he and Elizabeth divided their assets. The cheap house in town went to Williams, while Elizabeth agreed to pay her husband $62,000, his share of the more expensive suburban home. After this incident, the Canadian military immediately stripped Russell Williams of his military status in a special ceremony. 4 soldiers burned the criminal's uniform and medals. He was the first Canadian officer to receive such symbolic punishment. However, he would still receive a pension, as Canadian law does not allow for pension removal in such cases. With no similar precedent in Canada, there was no legal basis for suspending his pension. This fact was publicized through the media, sparking public outrage. Eventually, the government agreed to pass a federal bill to revoke pensions in such cases. From the case of Russell Williams, we must seriously reflect on human ethics. Not everyone who appears honorable and decent possesses a kind heart. Sometimes that is just what they want to show, while their life behind the scenes is full of unimaginable secrets.